Again, how wonderful it is to see everyone here as we talked about how we were going to give a team sermon. We decided to do past, the present, and the future. So I've been given the task of explaining the whole Reformation in 5 minutes. Okay?
Check your watches.
That's right. That's right. There you go. Hope springs eternal. Let me begin by saying this. Martin Luther never wanted a break with the Catholic Church. Not initially. Martin Luther, like many who came before him, wanted to reform the corruptions within the church that had occurred during the reign of 6 popes who were so comically bungling and tragically scandalous that it almost as though this little set had deliberately placed their collective corruptions in a papier-mâché monster, hung it from a tree, and begged the Augustinian monk to take a dozen or so good whacks at it. If you're interested in reading more about these unpapal pontiffs, read Barbara Tuckman's The March of Folly. Pope Leo X, the Pope during the majority of the early Reformation, is said to have emptied the Vatican treasury to such a point that his successor spent his entire reign making it up. The main project in question was the restoration of the Basilica of St. Peter. In order to finish this marvelous piece of architecture with artwork of a suitably grand nature, Leo turned to the old tried and true technique of selling indulgences. Now, indulgences were a kind of late medieval get-out-of-jail-free card used by the church to make money. When a Christian purchased an indulgence from the church, he obtained for himself or whoever else he was trying to benefit, a reduction in the amount of time the person's soul had to spend in purgatory, atoning for sins before he ascended into heaven. The more time off, the more it cost. But the indulgence sellers promised 100% you got whatever you paid for. Well, actually, they wound up changing their minds about that because between 1515 and 1523, the church canceled the powers of the previously sold indulgences. So if you wanted that period covered, you had to buy a new and improved indulgence. However, the church declared that the purchasers of this new and improved indulgence didn't have to make confession or even exhibit any contrition. They just had to hand over the money, and the thing was done. That new issue was that much more powerful. Now, in Luther's area, the local indulgence salesman was a Dominican named Johann Tetzel. He'd been in the indulgence racket for a long time, and he was really good at it. He was a combination of Ernest Angley and Benny Hinn, okay? You know, the kind of guy who put the additional E's in Jesus, you know, that kind of guy, you know, Jesus. You know, he sat around them and said, "Friends, don't you hear the voices of your wailing dead parents who say to you, 'Have mercy on me, because we are in severe punishment and pain. From this you could redeem us with a small alms. But you don't want to do so. We've created you, we fed you, we cared for you, we left you our temporal goods. Then why are you then so cruel and harsh? You don't want us to save us. It only takes a little bit of money.' Friends, listen to their cries and free them from their torment. For when a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." But you didn't know that there was a Alabama section of Germany, did you? All right. Now, in Luther's mind, the indulgence trade brought him up against the absurdity of bargaining with God, jockeying for God's favor, indeed, bribing God. After all, why had the Son died on the cross? Because that was how much God loved the world. And that alone, Luther reasoned, was enough for a person to be found justified or worthy. Now, fired by this new certainty of God's love for him, Luther became radicalized. He preached, he disputed, and above all, he used the new mass media of the time, the printing press. More about that in a second. Now, things came to a head in 1520. By then, Luther had taken to calling the church a brothel, and Pope Leo X the Antichrist. Well, the Pope eventually excommunicated him, and Luther responded by publicly burning the papal order. In fact, the Wittenberg University students, where he was teaching at the time, also gathered as many copies as they could find around them, and let's just say they did various things with that papal document that, fortified by certain beverages, students tend to do. Let your imaginations play. Now, reformers had been executed for less, but Luther by now was a very popular man throughout Europe, and the authorities knew they would have serious trouble if they tried to kill him. So the church gave him one more chance to recant at a gathering in the cathedral city of Worms in 1521. And it's during this time that one of Luther's most famous, frankly, misquotes occurred. "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me." After this, Luther headed for home, but he was kidnapped, quote unquote, along the way by a posse of knights in order to give the authorities time to cool off. And though annoyed by the delay, he didn't waste any time. He spent his time translating the New Testament into the common language of the people. And by using High German, a form of language that was just starting to gel at the time, in such a poetic way that spoke to the common person, he essentially created the modern German language, kind of like how the King James Version of the Bible was instrumental in creating modern English. Now, during his lifetime, Luther became probably the biggest celebrity in all of Europe. And that was not due to his personal qualities or the importance of his cause. He had really good timing. Luther was born only a few decades after Gutenberg's invention of movable type. And though it took him a while to start writing, once he got started, he did not finish. 3.1 million copies of Luther's works were in circulation between 1516 and 1546. That's how popular he was. The result of the Reformation? Well, there's a story about how two Jesuit priests were visiting St. Peter's Basilica for the very first time. And one looked around and how magnificent everything was. And he asked his friend, "Wow, I wonder how much it cost to build this." And his friend said, "Oh, about half of Europe." Luther's impact on the world, both positive and, to be honest, negative, was and remains substantial. And my little talk here, it has been a very, very superficial gloss of the happenings of the Reformation. But the impact he had goes even to modern times. In 1934, an African-American pastor from Georgia made a trip to Berlin to attend an international conference of Baptist pastors. While this man, by the name of Michael King, became so impressed with what he learned about Martin Luther that he decided to do something dramatic. He changed his own name to Martin Luther King. His 5-year-old son, Michael Jr., therefore became Martin Luther King Jr. And that, my friends in Christ, brings us to the present day.
On the 25th of October, 1958, the Archdiocese of Detroit lost its Archbishop, at the time Edward Cardinal Mooney, who was at the time in Rome about to enter a conclave. That conclave was to elect Angelo Roncalli, a roly-poly, kind of easygoing, jovial kind of guy who they figured wouldn't cause much trouble. Angelo Roncalli changed his name to John the 23rd. He went to his advisors and people in the Curia and said, "You know, it's been a very long time since we've had a council. I think we're due to have one." He said, "I think I'd like to have one in about 4 years." Now the Curia was the one who contained all the power. And they said, holiness, that's not possible. We cannot possibly put together a council in 4 years. It's not going to happen. We've got documents to write. We've got accommodations to set up. It's going to be way bigger than the last one. We can't possibly do it. He said, now the deal was, they figured if they extended it a little while longer, they would wait him out. He was elderly. His health was not the greatest. They figured in 5 years' time, he would be gone. And then the issue went away. On top of that, the Curia had all the power. And they told him, they said, holiness, there's nothing that a council can do that we can't take care of, that the Curia can't do also. Of course, why would you want to give up all that power? In a church, a council overrules everything else, up to and including a pope. So they said, holiness is not possible. They figured if we push him 5 years, we got him. John the 23rd thought the same thing. He figured, if you push me to 5 years, I can't make it. So he said, are you sure, absolutely sure we can't do this in 4 years? They said, not possible, holiness. He said, okay, then we'll do it in 3. And the Second Vatican Council became the first council that was not reactionary. It was the first one that wasn't a response to a problem. It was a pastoral council. It didn't come with an agenda. It didn't come with fear. It didn't come with this notion of we're trying to fight something. So the shields were down. It was not an issue of trying to defend against something. The council started to look at the church itself. And they said we need to bring it up to date. A nice Italian word, aggiornamento, to bring it up to date. And among the things they started looking at was the history of Martin Luther and the history that the church had had with the church that had sprung from it. And on looking at it without an agenda, without fear, without trying to be reactionary, they said they've got a lot of good points. There's a lot of stuff that they have in common. And we don't need to be out there with the fists up or the nails out or anything else. Let's come together and talk. And as early as the time of the Second Vatican Council, that began to happen. Now, 50 years later, there is a dialogue, an open, respectful dialogue that exists between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. And in keeping with this anniversary, we have a special bonus now on indulgences. 6 years for $5. That's a good deal. So. There's dialogue on a lot of things in terms of the Eucharist, in terms of the Word, the idea of the primacy of the Word, the idea of a lot of issues that we're looking at, justification and different things back and forth. Looking at and respecting each other's theology and the insight that each of us has. There's been a lot of give, a lot of take. It's not a total meeting yet. And I'm not sure at this point we're ready for communion because of different political things more than theological. But I have to tell you as a Catholic, we draw the line at giving a bingo.
So where do we go from here? We still have bingo. I think of the 3, past, the present, and the future, I lucked out. Because I can say anything. We can dream anything. We can be filled with hope, and anything can happen if we want it to, and if we work at it. I found it very interesting when Pastor Fogle was talking at the end of his talk, he talked about another Martin Luther, because that was my idea too, Martin Luther King Jr. And just a few decades ago, he also had a dream. He had a dream that all people could live in peace. And although his dream was about different issues and different situations, nevertheless, he had a dream, and unfortunately his dream has not yet come to pass. But it doesn't mean that we don't give up on that, and it doesn't mean that we don't give up on this. But we can't accomplish it by ourselves. This morning, I'm looking to see if he's here, and he's not. This morning at church, someone asked me, is this a trap, this service? Is it a trap? A trap for what? Don't we believe that we can work together? Of course we do. And as I said, we can have hopes and dreams for the future, but we have to be able to work at it. And it's not just handshakes and songs together. It means working down deep in our hearts. It means a change of heart and a willingness to listen. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream that all people could be one and all people could live in peace. And we have that dream as well. And let's not let the dream die. Apart from me, you can do nothing, God says. Apart from God, we can do nothing. All the dreams and the hopes of our lives have to be centered in our faith in the Lord.